Okay, so this is something that I wanted to talk about for a while now, and it's this whole dose versus wheel discussion. If you, I guess, knew about it, it was very popular a couple of years ago, where people were talking about, what there's more of, are there more doors or wheels in the world and stuff like that. But I was looking through the discussion, and I feel like there wasn't really much focus on the thought process behind the question. So that's kind of what I want to talk about here. I wanted to make a video basically talking about what I think about the question, but also trying to talk through, I guess, the reasoning behind the question, because I think it's one of the questions where the thinking behind the question is actually as interesting as the answer, or probably in my opinion at least. I think it's actually more interesting than the answer. That's what I want to basically talk about. Also, I don't know if you can hear it, but there's raining. It's raining right now, so maybe you can hear that in the background. And if you can, then I'm sorry. I can't really do anything to do. Can't really do anything to deal with that. Maybe it might clear up. Who knows? Okay, so to begin, let's actually think through what makes this question so difficult. The reason this question is hard is because there's a couple of things happening here. Firstly, doors and wheels come from sources. And when I say sources, I mean like doors come from houses, apartments, office buildings, and all that stuff. And then wheels also come from a bunch of different sources. And immediately, this already makes things hard because the question you have to ask yourself is how many sources are there for a door or a wheel? Now, you wouldn't really know, right? That's why I think to answer this question, you just have to make a guess. But I think this is what makes this question hard. I mean, sorry, this is one of the things that makes this question really hard to answer because it's hard for you to come with a good estimate for how many doors or wheels there must be in the world. And secondly, after you come up with all your sources, you then have to go ahead and come up with the estimate, so like a number for all of the sources in terms of how much they contribute to the final, I guess, sum for how many doors there are or wheels there are. So what I mean is that for houses, you have to come with the estimate for how many doors there are in houses, then do the same for apartments, do the same for cars, do the same for all of them. And I think it's these two things which make this question hard to answer. That firstly, it's hard for you to come up with the estimate for all of these sources, and secondly, it's hard for you to come up with all the sources in the world. Now, there's actually one more reason this question is kind of hard. Although I mean, this is not really a reason, but it's most of the fact that you also have to come up with a good meaning for what counts as a door and what doesn't. What that essentially means is that if your definition for what a door is very open, then you will have a lot more sources to actually deal with. Like imagine if you said that transistor gates are doors, or I don't know, the lid that you take off of your TV remote to put the batteries in. Maybe you think that's a door as well. If your definition is more open, then you have more sources you actually have to filter out. And I think it's this thing which also adds another layer of complexity to the question. Okay, so with that said, right, how can we actually go about answering this? Well, I think there's a couple of tricks that we can use to actually make this a lot more simpler for us. Firstly, you should actually think about this whole sources thing that I'm talking about. These sources, you come to realize that these sources are pretty much it's a distribution. And what I mean by distribution is that you can rank them based on how much they contribute to the door argument or the wheel argument. As in, like, at the first position, you would have something like apartments or houses as they contribute the most to doors. Then maybe second would be like office buildings or something, and then at the very very end, maybe something like submarines or tanks or something. I don't know, whatever you want. I guess whatever you think is the least contributes the least amount to doors, and the same can be said for wheels. And what this essentially means is that if you assume that the distribution looks something like this, where the bigger sources actually contribute the most to this sum, then we can kind of ignore all the rest. We can just ignore all this other stuff like tanks, submarines, and all that stuff, or planes, because they don't contribute much to the actual final sum. And instead, we can just focus on the first biggest sources. So maybe the first five or the first 10 or whatever. Now, there is a bit of a flaw in what I'm saying, and that is that I don't really know what this distribution looks like. Again, I want to be very careful in the word because I don't really know. I'm only guessing that it will look like this because generally speaking, when people talk about doors or wheels, they come up with the biggest sources and then they come with a bunch of smaller sources. So I'm guessing it looks something like this, where most of the sum comes from the biggest sources, and then we can ignore, then the other ones don't contribute that much. But it could be wrong. Maybe it could look something like this, where all the sources contribute evenly. So this is the assumption that I have to make here. Okay, so knowing all of this, let's actually get into this question. Let's start off with doors first. I did a quick Google search, and Google pretty much says there are 2.3 billion houses and apartments in the world. It didn't actually say what the split between houses and apartments are, like how many of these are houses and apartments. So let's just, I guess, do an arbitrary split, and let's just say that it's around 50-50 split. So let's say that 1.3 billion of these are houses and the other 1 billion are apartments. Okay, so now you do that, you then need to ask yourself, okay, how many doors are in a house? And this is a hard question to answer. But I searched it up on Google, and Google pretty much said that there's around 3 to 4 people in a household. So let's just go with four, which means that if you assume one door per person, so that's 4 doors already. Let's also include one entrance door, so that's five. And let's then include 8 cupboard doors. So then the total will be 13. So that's 13 times 1.3, which comes down to 16.9 billion. Let's just round it up to 17, just to be just to keep things simple. Now you might disagree with this number, as in like maybe you think there's more than 13 doors in a house, and you would probably be right, right? But I'm being conservative on purpose, mostly just to I guess account for there's different types of houses in the world, right? This number includes all the houses in the world for all countries. So that's I'm being conservative on purpose because of that, and also because if it turns out that we need to add more doors, we can just do it later. So let's just keep things like this for now, and we can move on. Okay, so next let's think about the apartments. Now, again, you have to ask yourself how many doors in an apartment. And firstly, there would definitely be far less doors in an apartment than there would be in a house. So let's just go with there's one door for the entrance. There would also be one for the bathroom as well. And for cupboards and all that other stuff, let's say you have five. I think five is a decent number, which comes down to 7 billion dollars. Now, actually, no, you know what? That's too low. So let's just increase this by 3 billion extra. So let's just say go with 10 billion instead. Again, these numbers are very low, but if it turns out we need to add more later, we can just do that later. Okay, so moving on. Next, we need to think about other sources. The most obvious that comes to my mind is cars, and Google says there are around 1.6 billion cars in the world. So if you do the math, that's 1.6 times 4, which comes down to 6.4 billion dollars. Now, next is where I think I would probably disagree with a lot of people, and that is that generally speaking, you would also need to add up other vehicle types as well, right? Like buses, trains, and all that stuff. But in my opinion, I think it's fine to ignore them because remember what I said before. We only care about the biggest sources, and if you actually do a search on Google about how many buses there are, how many trains there are, and all that stuff, it generally tells you that they are in the millions. So they are like millions of buses, or they are thousands of planes or whatever. But again, we don't care if they are in the millions. We only need stuff that's in the billions because that's not really going to move the needle forward that much. So that's why we can just ignore it. Okay, so there's one more source that I haven't talked about, and that is how many doors there are in every other building that is not a house or apartment. So this one is really hard to figure out because you are trying to come up with the average amount of doors for every single building in the world. That is obviously very hard to do because the building type matters a lot. If you're talking about like an office building or hospital or university or whatever, then they would have more doors per building. But if you're talking about a very simple building like a shop or something, then obviously it's not going to have many doors. But again, there's also this idea that the bias towards how many doors are in a building is probably low because of the fact that whilst there are some very big buildings with a lot of doors, those buildings, there aren't many of those buildings in the world. Now this is a lot of thinking, right? But I think one better way to actually approach this problem is that since we actually now know how many doors there are in like residential places, so there's 17 billion in houses and 10 billion in apartments, we can use them as like a reference point to then figure out how many doors there must be in every single other building in the world. The amount of doors for every other building in the world. So then the question is, what would that number be? I would say that it's definitely more than 17 billion, right? I think that's not controversial. But by how many factors? Maybe by three. So, which pretty much means that if you see a door, there's a 3 time higher chance that door comes from a building that is not a house or apartment. I guess that's one way to phrase it. Maybe you want to say by 4 or 5. I'm not sure. It really depends on where you want to draw the line, right? But let's just go with 4 because I think that's a pretty decent value. So then we get 17 billion times 4, which is 68 billion, meaning there's 68 billion doors from every other building that is not a house. And I think that's kind of all I have to say for the door argument in terms of sources. So if you just, I guess, combine everything together, that comes down to 68 plus 17 plus 10, which is 95 billion doors. Okay, so let's just talk about wheels next. Okay, so this is me from the future talking. I was really unsure whether or not the value that I got, 95 billion, was correct. or maybe it was in the ballpark or something seemingly correct. So I decided to search up what other people, what value other people came up with, or what the general consensus is, right? And if you I guess look online with how many doors there are in the world, you get a lot of different values. I saw stuff as low as 197 million doors. Some which were saying that there's 8 billion doors only from residential places like apartments and stuff. And then I also saw one figure which had this 42 billion doors, which apparently comes from some university, which comes from a study done by the University of Florida. I tried to find this study, but I couldn't even find it, so I'm not even sure if this is maybe it's real. I'm not really sure, but I couldn't find it. So the consensus is that I probably overshot it by a very wide margin. But with that said, even if you think that what I said was wrong, you could also make the case that mine one can also, I guess, cancel out by also including a lot of cupboard doors and stuff like that as well. Because if you really think about it, a lot of these numbers seemingly seem to pretty much include like regular doors, right? And since you can make a pretty strong argument that for every like normal door, there's like a cupboard door, a wardrobe door, stuff like that. So there's like a 1-to-1 ratio here. That means that it's kind of okay to double this figure anyway. So I'm not really sure. It's really confusing, like, because the thing is the numbers are so like so all over the place that it's hard to really figure out what is correct and what isn't. I also decided to look up how many doors are manufactured each year, and even that was kind of weird. Apparently, there's like 10 billion doors which are manufactured each year, and if that's the case, then maybe the figure I came to is probably correct, because the amount that is being manufactured needs to be relative to the amount that the world actually has or that the world actually needs, right? Those two are linked. So the fact that it's 10 billion means that maybe I'm correct, but at the same time, this number was kind of, I don't really know where it came from. But regardless, I think the general consensus here is that you should definitely, at the very least, decrease the amount by a couple, right? Definitely a little bit. So definitely keep that in mind for the rest of the video. Okay, so let's just talk about wheels next. First of all, we can just start out by taking this whole car argument that we had. Every car also has 4 wheels, so that's 1.6 billion times 4, which is 6.4 billion wheels. Next, I was also thinking about how many tires are just disposed of in the world, and so if you then search up how many wheels are in landfill, that only tells you there's only 4 billion wheels, which is actually not really that much. But again, we can take this value as well. So 6.4 plus 4 billion, which comes down to pretty much 10 billion wheels. Next, we can also talk about bikes as well. And apparently there's 1 billion bikes plus 700 million motorbikes. So if you do the math, that's 3.4 billion wheels. So you add that to the figure as well. But next is, I think, where things become kind of interesting, and this is where when we start talking about toys. If you search up how many Hot Wheels there are in the world, it tells you there's 6 billion Hot Wheels cars in the world, and that is a lot of Hot Wheels cars. So if you do the math, that's 6 times 4, which is 24 billion wheels. So now our estimate comes down to 37 billion, 37.8. Let's just round that to 38 billion wheels total. Now, obviously, we're not caught up, but I think this is where things become kind of interesting, because that was 24 billion wheels just from Hot Wheels alone, just from Hot Wheels. And the question you have to ask yourself is, how many wheels must there be in every other toy in the world that isn't a Hot Wheels? Definitely a lot, definitely a lot. And I think if you were to work out that value, it would definitely be more than the door amount that we came up with. So it would definitely be a very high value. So the question you have to ask yourself is, okay, so how many toys must there be in the world that isn't a Hot Wheels toys that actually has wheels on it? Now, again, this is hard for us to figure out, because if you just search how many toys there are in the world, it doesn't actually tell you. So we kind of have to, I guess, think through this a little bit. But we can do the same technique that I did before, where we can take this Hot Wheels thing as a reference point and kind of just extrapolate information from it. Basically asking the question of, if you were given a toy in front of you, what are the chances that that toy would be Hot Wheels? I would say that that is a very high number, maybe like 100 to 1. So out of 100 toys, only one is Hot Wheels. Maybe you think it's high, that's fine. But that is not really what we're interested in. We're only interested in, if you were given a toy, what is the chance that, and that has wheels, what is the chance that that toy is a Hot Wheel? And I still think this is actually a very high number. But by how many factors is it high by? And in my opinion, if you were to ask me, I would say that this number is probably maybe 5 or 6 or something. And so knowing this, we can just multiply the Hot Wheels amount by 5 or 6. So if you just do that, then we get, so if we do that, that's 6 times 5, so that's 30 billion toys. Now then we have to multiply this value by how many wheels there are in each of these toys, which wouldn't actually be 4, because just not every toy has 4 wheels, right? So then the question is, how many wheels must it actually have? So what's the bias towards? With that said though, I think it's probably fair to say that most toys probably have around 4 wheels anyways. So maybe this discussion is actually not even that important, because even if you, I guess, take into account the bias, it would only decrease the actual final number by a couple of decimal points. So maybe we would have like 3.6 versus like 4.5 wheels instead. So maybe it doesn't really matter. So I think we're fine going with 4 wheels anyways. And so if you do the math, that's 30 billion toys times by 4 wheels, which is equal to 120 billion wheels altogether. And honestly, we don't even actually have to include all the other calculations we did for all the other wheels we came up with, because just that number alone kind of just beats the entire DOE argument just by itself. And even if you were to decrease this toys amount by 4 instead of 5, right, that would still be enough to really beat it just by itself. So I think just from that alone, I think you can kind of see that this is kind of a blowout for wheels. And honestly, I think that's kind of where we can end this video. um I am kind of surprised by the result, by how much, I guess, wheels won by. But I did have a hunch, especially because of toys. I think they definitely make up a large percentage of wheels anyways. But anyways, I think that kind of just further proved the narrative that there are definitely more wheels than there are doors in the world. So okay, so you can kind of end this video now, but there's a couple of more points that I wanted to address, just to finish this video off. Firstly, if you were to, I guess, keep going, you would then also add other wheel-based things as well into the discussion, like skateboards, trolleys, baby strollers, office chairs. But to that, I want to say that, first of all, they're not actually relevant, because remember what I said before, that we only really care about sources which actually are in the billions, and a lot of the sources like rollerblades and um, I'm pretty sure baby strollers as well, they're not in the millions. Sorry, they're not in the billions. So they don't actually factor into the argument at all. They're not going to move the needle up. Although there is definitely a second side to this argument, that maybe you could say that the distribution looks something like this, where even though, I guess, they are in the millions, there's just so many wheel-based sources out there that they could definitely move the needle up by at least maybe like 20 billion, or something like that. I'm not really sure. But anyways, I mean, we don't need to get to that point, so it doesn't really matter too much. Okay, so there's one more point that I want to talk about, and that is that if you actually think about all of the numbers that we saw, it's actually not too surprising to think that wheels won. Because if you think about it, we saw that there are 1.6 billion cars in the world, right? So there's 1.6 billion cars in the world. But we also saw that there's 6 billion Hot Wheels cars in the world. And the reason I think these numbers are important is that if you think about it, these numbers puts into perspective how prevalent these things actually are. Like when you actually go outside and see a car, right, and you think about how often you see a car, but then you think about the fact that there are 6 times more Hot Wheels cars in the world. But would you say that you see Hot Wheels 6 times more than you see a car? Definitely not. Unless you have a Hot Wheels collection, you definitely don't see Hot Wheels 6 times as often as you see cars. And I feel like you can kind of apply this kind of logic to everything. That there's 2.3 billion houses and apartments. Would you say that there's 2 times as many houses and apartments in the world than there are cars? Maybe you could say that. That's actually a better argument to make. But the point I'm trying to make is that the how prevalent something is, and how small it is, I think there is a correlation happening here, because it seems like the reason wheels won is because wheels are just everywhere, and they come in mostly a small form factor. That's why a lot of the wheels that actually ended up winning this argument came down from wheels from toys, right? And that's why, and a lot of the things that people think about which have wheels are also a lot of things which where they actually have smaller wheels. And the reason I'm saying that is because it seems like as the object becomes smaller, its size, or how many of them are in the world, increases by a lot, right? It increases by a lot. And I think this is what made the final difference in the end, that wheels can exist and be in a very small form factor, and because of that they're easy to make, and they easy to mass produce, and it is because of that they ended up winning. Like houses, there are like 1.6 billion houses in the world, right? But there are 6 billion Hot Wheels in the world, and 6 billion Hot Wheels only produced by one company versus houses produced by like what, so many different companies and all of this stuff. Houses are like the fundamental cornerstones of society, and one company with Hot Wheels could make more Hot Wheels and they could make houses. I think it kind of says a lot about the fact that because of the form factor, it makes sense that wheels would win just because of the fact that they're so small, and that's why they're so prevalent. It doesn't feel like they're prevalent because you don't see Hot Wheels as often as you see cars, right? But they are definitely prevalent, and I think is what made the ultimate difference in the end, that wheels can exist in a smaller form factor, and that's why there's so many of them in the world. And they also, I guess, more disposable as well. Whilst doors, they usually are more human shaped and they're bigger, right? And their, I guess, existence is also tied to how many buildings they are in the world. And all of that meant was that wheels would just end up winning overall. Okay, so that's all I have to say. Let me know what you guys think as well. Whether you think that I'm wrong with my wheel argument or my door argument or whatever. If you think that I was off on some figures, then let me know. If you got more suggestions like this video, then definitely let me know. I would love to make it. But okay, that's all I have to say. If you enjoyed, let me know and all that stuff, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.